Let me ask you first, Ambassador Burns, 3 days after Istanbul, where do you find us in our fight against terror?
Well, I think obviously it's a huge wake-up call for Turkey, but also for us. There have been 14 terrorist attacks in Turkey in the last 2 years. Now, some of them were Kurdish-inspired because they're dealing with Kurdish terrorism, but this one, obviously, the Turkish government believes was the Islamic State. And I think that's the essential question we've got to answer is, are we trying to contain the Islamic State, or are we trying to defeat it? Because I'm not sure we have a defeat policy in place. The taking back of Fallujah went very slowly. Of course, Mosul may be months or a year away from being taken back, and the Islamic State is metastasizing into Libya. It is a shrinking organization, but it's nowhere close to being a defeated organization. So that's, I think, the big question for American policymakers, for this administration and for the next administration. It has a lot of implications for Syria, because I think the Obama team has done very well in trying to retrain the Iraqi army and put air power there, but we've been very risk averse in Syria in terms of aiding in a big way rebel groups and putting our own people on the ground. So these are big questions for us to think about.
Dr. Farkas, do you agree that we don't have a strategy to defeat ISIS?
Yes, unfortunately, and I really want to go back also to the Syria point, because you guys mentioned at the top of this segment, you know, this new, they're calling it strategy. I don't think it's a strategy. The administration now is going to work with Russia to target some of these terrorists like Jabhat al-Nusra. There is no end game. I mean, this is the problem. You can't separate. What they've been trying to do all along, the administration, is separate the counterterrorism fight from resolving the conflict in Syria.
Why has the administration been so flummoxed by Syria? That you talk about a problem from hell.
It is a problem from hell.
That the entire West has just turned a blind eye to, and this administration still does not have a comprehensive policy towards the biggest geopolitical crisis of the last 4 years.
Right, and I think the other thing is that they need to find an angle in to change the dynamic, and one of the angles is the humanitarian, but they're not talking about it. I mean, today there was an op-ed, you know, 9 million people in Syria are essentially starving.
Right.
Over 500,000 are under siege. You know, that's in addition to the people who are being bombed, barrel bombed by the regime, etc. So I think there's a humanitarian urgency. We need to do something. That we keep a blind eye is problematic, obviously.
Nick, wait, I'll ask you the same question. What is it about Syria? Whether you're talking about the Red Line or the barrel bombing, you talk about Assad, you talk about the crimes against humanity, you talk about the mass starvation, you talk about the refugees that are not only bringing chaos to the Middle East, but now actually impacting votes in Great Britain. Why has this administration so missed the boat on Syria from the beginning?
Well, to be fair to President Obama, this is about the most difficult international issue that we're dealing with internationally, and I think any administration would have struggled with.
Mr. Ambassador, we've been having guests tell us that on this set now for 4 years.
Listen to my second point. But my first point, it is hard. It's really difficult to know what to do, and there are all sorts of risks for the United States. And we ought to learn some lessons from what happened to us in Iraq. But I do think if you look at the Jeffrey Goldberg interview, it was so insightful. The president is entirely risk averse. I think he believes that anything that we do is going to end up being bad for the country. And as Evelyn said, I'll add one more data point. There were 22.4 million Syrians at the beginning of the war in 2011, of the revolution. Over 12 million homeless, over half the country. So we've got to have a humanitarian policy to get humanitarian corridors in there to bring medical relief and food to people. I think that we ought to set up safe havens and no-flight zones on the border with Turkey, and that would help our relationship with Turkey. So those are some of the things we should do.
Why won't the president do it?
I think Ambassador Burns said it. You know, that they're risk averse. And because there is risk, obviously, when you have to set up a safe zone, your military has to go in there and control the airspace. The Russians have all these air defense systems, so it's challenging. I mean, we're going to have to call their bluff and say, okay, Russians, you know, don't fly here. We're letting the civilians have this space where they can go and seek a safe place to live and get fed.
Mark, I think Mika's right. They're not risk averse. They're paralyzed and have been paralyzed for years.
I think the president doesn't feel paralyzed. He feels like that his policy is to be risk averse, to not get America involved in a war that's complicated, to not confront the Russians. I don't think he thinks he's paralyzed. I think he's enacting his attitude and his policies about how to deal with the region.
This is his legacy. By the way, Syria and the chaos of Syria, Nick Burns, likely will be every bit as much the president's legacy 10 years from now as Iraq was George W. Bush's legacy. And I'm not so sure people are going to be looking any more kindly on Barack Obama's inaction than on George W. Bush's overreaction.
Well, and you know, to add to that, Joe, what's happening, as you know, is that Syria has now exploded into Lebanon, into Turkey, because this attack, of course, comes from the Islamic State, into Jordan and into Iraq. And so you've got this problem now engulfing the Middle East. The Islamic State now has an outpost in Libya. So if you don't deal with the problem at the source, and I'm not suggesting 100,000 American ground troops into Syria. Nobody in their right mind would. But we've got to begin to support factions, those rebel factions that we think have a possibility of blunting the Assad government and also of going after the Islamic State. It's going to be incredibly difficult to do, but I don't see any alternative but to get in there, arm the rebels, and become part of that, part of the solution, we hope, in the long term.
Evelyn, you agree?
Yeah, it just goes back again to the point that has been made over and over again, that we lack leverage to force the Syrians, the Russians, and the Iranians to make peace on our terms. Right now, they have all the leverage, and they're trying to force us to make peace on their terms. And this deal, you know, attacking the terrorists, the Jabhat al-Nusra folks together, I mean, that only helps them because Assad comes out stronger. Our opposition guys are still weak, and after that, they're even weaker.
You know, by the way, if for any reason Alex Corson, Donnie decides not to ever return to the show again, if you could save this segment for his highlight reel, I think we will look back on all the years that he's been on the show and say, this was his finest segment.
Well, thank you. Finest hour.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Thank you, Donnie, for
You were
contributing.
amazing.
Actually, thank you for not contributing. Ambassador Nick Burns.